So come gather round. We've got a special session going on now, so do come around the Talkaoke table. We've got Carl from Ravensbourne that's going to do a little presentation, which is the start of something bigger, a live experiment in the other room. Is that right?
Yes, we're going to do a workshop later on.
So come around. Come and have a seat. Come and have a seat. You're not committing to anything. Don't worry. You don't have to. We were talking yesterday about a video game or a VR experience where when you get shot, you actually get blood leaked out of you. Is that the one we're talking about today? Okay. I won't say anything about it then, but we're not taking any blood here is the main point.
No blood.
Anyway, come ye gather round and let's find out what Carl's got to say, and then we're gonna open it up. Is that right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, cool. So, hello everybody. I'm just going to introduce Carl and you take it from there. How about that? You happy? You ready to go? Should we let a few more people gravitate around? No, I think, come and have a seat. Come and get involved in this. We've got some more seats. Can we have some more seats from the... Oh, there we go. There's about 200 seats behind that door. So there shouldn't be... as far as seats is concerned, we're in a post-scarcity society. In this room, anyway. Anyway, over to you, Carl.
Thank you. Hello. Right, so we're going to talk about perceptual hacking, and we've got a demo later on, but this is just a little presentation to introduce some of the ideas and range of ways that you can hack perception. And basically, we're very interested in this idea of context and the problem with just focusing on vision and just focusing on auditory senses. So yeah, the next slide. So we're really interested in immersion and the various ranges of immersion that you can actually use. This is a game called Bloodsport, and basically in this game you are also linked up to a drip, and every time you get shot in the game, blood is actually taken out of your body. And actually, this obviously means the gamers have a real invested interest in the experience, and all the blood is then donated to the blood bank afterwards, so full context engineering. Next slide. I'm really interested in this idea of empathy engines, and I know Carl is working in this area. So how do we actually hack into somebody's experience and actually simulate what it might be like to be a refugee, for instance? And you're certainly not going to get there just from an auditory or visual experience, so you need to involve more of the senses. Next slide. We're doing a big European project at the moment where we're actually trying to create a new form of media called wearable experience, where simply what we're going to do is create an experience of recording somebody's experience and then reenacting it. So if you can imagine a surgeon doing surgery, we can map the surgery in real time, make a 3D model of it on the fly, then we can actually map the surgeon, his head movement, his eye movement, his hand movement, his finger movement, and then we can, using smart glasses and smart gloves, actually embody his experience. So literally wearing somebody else's experience. Next slide. So this is a friend of mine, Mark. He's going to wear the Oculus Rift for 28 days. Nobody's worn it for more than 4 days, and in that 28-day period, he's not going to have access to his own eyes or his own hearing, and he's literally going to wear somebody else's experience. So it fits quite nicely with what we're trying to do with the WeKit project. He's literally going to be wearing this, sort of a modified Oculus, and it's going to be waterproofed. He's going to wear it in the shower. He's going to wear it while he's asleep. He's not going to be able to take it off. And he's got £1.2 million from Red Bull to do the experiment. He's going to be on TV every day for 28 days. And no one knows what's going to happen to him. But he's young enough to survive, I think. He's 23, so he'll be all right. Next slide. So we're really interested in this idea of what happens when you can start to move your eyes around via your hands. So arms and fingers become eye muscles and create impossible human biological perspectives. And this is part of the demo we hope to show later on today. Next slide. Or this, where we actually create a new visual system completely, where we can actually create 360 vision by taking a 360 input, squashing it into 180 degrees. And it only takes your brain 15 minutes to adjust I've actually worn this device for a week. And it's amazing because your brain sort of, without any nausea, says, well, thanks very much, why didn't you do this before? And I'm really interested in what design interventions we can actually incorporate without really messing up the brain, which ones work, which ones don't. It's a big design problem. Next slide. This is a nice example called reverse blinking, where you actually only see the world when you blink. So again, really fucks around with your perceptual systems. Next slide. Or this, where you actually wear these glasses, and as you're eating your food, it's shrunk or increased in size, depending on whether you're fat or thin, to trick your brain into thinking that you've eaten more than you have. This is in the Cyber Lab of Keio University in Japan. Next slide. So this idea of sort of reimagining what already exists and using perspective to shape reality instead of changing reality itself. This is an artist in China who's looking at our perceptions of beauty and actually tweaking, with convex and concave mirrors, your features on your face. Next slide. Or this, where we can actually slow time down in real time with a decelerator helmet and start to see patterns emerge that you'd never normally be able to hack into. Next slide. Another experiment we're going to try and do later, which is this idea of putting the cameras that you're looking through with the Oculus behind you, and suddenly you're looking at this person going, who's that? And it's you, but you're tricking your brain. Your brain's always asking itself, where am I, and looking at all the senses. So, how much can we trick the brain? What are the dangers of doing this? And again, this is something that we'll talk about, and we'll talk about later. Or body swapping, where you just swap the inputs from these devices, and then you touch yourself. And if you can sync that with your partner accurately, then you actually swap bodies. Next slide. Or this bit of research, Olaf Blanke has actually found with a small amount of transcranial stimulation that you can reliably trick the brain into thinking you're out of body. I put this up on Facebook, and I got about 800 comments from all these consciousness scientists saying that this just proves that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, and they were all raving about it. But I think
does that mean that epiphenomenon?
It just means that the brain is primary, and the brain produces consciousness rather than consciousness produces the brain. Next slide. Persinger was doing an example of this, and this is a very old clunky version, but this transcranial stimulation is really having a renaissance now, and we're getting very, very small devices enabling people to have lucid dreams, for instance. So you literally give a small amount of electric signal to the brain when you're in REM, and it reliably creates lucid dreaming. Next slide. We've also got nootropics or smart drugs that create lucid dreams. Again, because the problem with lucid dreaming is you can learn as many techniques as you like, but it's the brain chemistry that's the big challenge. Next slide. Keio University found out that things are less heavy if they're white. They've done all these examples in the gym. Obviously, all the dumbbells are black, but if they're white, you'd be able to lift more of them. So they use augmented reality to turn things white. Next slide. There's a belt. This is again an older version. Feel space. You wear the belt for 3 weeks. It tells you where magnetic north is. Once you take the belt off, you know where magnetic north is forever. It creates a new sense. And I'm really interested in what other areas can we create new senses that we didn't have before. Next slide. Or this, where we start to contaminate the senses. Aroma Fork actually re-engineers smell and taste, so you actually have a whole new range of experiences. Next slide. Again, another demo that we've got in the room next door with bionic hearing, where we can actually start to context engineer our own sound environment. I know Jazz was playing with this yesterday. So it actually enables you to tune out certain sounds like babies crying or people snoring, but the rest of the sound environment is still there. Next slide. Or this example called Mind Song, where we actually turn our brainwaves into sound, or into music rather, and it enables you to sort of control your state of mind, because the more calm you become, the more silent the music becomes. Next slide. So there's, in terms of like wearables, we've also got hearables coming. I think this is my one but last slide. This idea that we can actually focus on hearing as much as seeing. Next slide. And this is the last slide. So basically, this is a new headset that's come out called Nirvana, which directly stimulates the vagus nerve whilst you're hearing music. And basically, you re-engineer sound. You start to experience music in a whole new way because it's directly interfering with the brain. Next, that's it. That's my slides. So yeah, cheers.
Wow. Well, thanks for that. Is the plan now to have a bit of a discussion about that? Because you've hit us with basically a whole field worth of ideas and, I mean, I feel pretty overwhelmed with all of that. I don't know where. Is there anywhere people want to start with this? Go through it one more time.
Yeah.
Is there one, go through it at twice the speed, maybe.
Is there one that interests you more than the others?
For me, the one that really blew my head off was the 360 vision.
Yeah.
Because 360 vision is obviously. I had a friend of mine who'd done DMT and suddenly got 360 vision, and it was like he was like quite shocked that it's kind of like a new level of consciousness, right? It's like the integral. If you talk about Gebse, talks about different levels of consciousness evolving, and having 360 vision seems to me like one of the simpler hacks, but one of the more profound. And obviously, we don't know what it actually does to the brain over time, but it seems to me that it was very easy to do. And we're also getting like cyclists having these glasses now that will avoid them getting killed with blind spots.
Yeah. Okay. 360 vision, simple but effective.
I work with Carl, and I'll be doing some of the demos later. But one of the things to be conscious of with technologies is that in some cases we're working with things which are activating things within us, which were always there. For example, animals have a natural sense of direction because of iron-based components that they've got inside their anatomy. But we also have a natural ability to know which direction north is, but it's been dumbed down over the centuries and through our evolution, one reason or another. But it's possible to wake those senses back up using things like the belt.
So are they somehow encoded in our DNA?
They absolutely are. And two of the demonstrations we're going to do today, one is about sensing energy around your body, and the other one is on remote viewing, actually accessing other regions of time and space by hacking what you're doing with your body and your nervous system. So we're going to be exploring that.
Okay, so basically, I mean, on the Friday we kind of heard something about we're only using 10% of our brain. Well, whereas that was argued to not be true, we're possibly not using all of our innate senses from evolutional time. Okay, well, we had a question here, so that's just my comment. I'm not really supposed to make comments, so I'll just pass it on to...
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a developer. So I'm quite interested in understanding which one of these are closest to, I guess, coming out of a research phase and where other developers, where it's a bit more open source, those kind of things.
So you want to know when this is going to hit the streets, basically?
Well, not the full commercial market, but when other developers could start contributing, basically where some of this technology is.
Well, most of it is already here. If you think about the bionic hearing, we've got that as a demo today. The whole, even some of the stuff I was showing about out-of-body experience, that's a lab in Sweden, Karolinska Institute, and they've been doing this out-of-body stuff, and also sort of making you tiny, making you into a giant, and Jazz again can talk about that in terms of depth perception. The 360 helmets are around. I'm trying to remember all the different examples, but I only really show examples that are real and that you can actually do yourself. So that's partly why we're doing a demo session as well, to have a chance to actually play with this stuff.
Okay. Do you think it changes you, just in terms of, I mean, obviously every experience changes, but does it change the way you see reality once you've tried a few of these things for good?
Yeah, I think the human project is far from complete, and we talked a lot about this yesterday. This idea that You know, we can do so much with sort of psychedelia and psychedelics, but I think the cyberdelic environment, where we're actually, you know, we can start to focus on our state of mind and get a reflection of our mood, and actually start to, you know, think about how do we fix depression without taking antidepressants. So I'm really interested in the social benefits from all of this stuff.
Right.
And I'd like to know.
Is there a particular one of these devices that's good at fixing depression?
Well, I think actually being disassociated from your state, from your general life, is a very positive state.
Right.
A lot of people think disassociation is a bad state. I think being out of body is a blessed relief.
So an out-of-body experience, some of those ones where you're seeing yourself, or maybe the epi-phenomenon of consciousness one.
Yeah, I think you know, I think people take, you know, having altered states of consciousness is generally good for you.
Okay.
And being able to control those altered states of consciousness is an interesting debate as well. Obviously, people say psychedelics and you don't have the control, and that's the design of those. So I think if you know, people were saying, well, you can't produce sort of traditional psychedelic states, and I'm like, well, you don't have to. You can do those as well.
Okay. There's a point over here.
Sorry, yeah, just backtracking a bit. But you were saying about one of them that might be beneficial for something like depression, and saying that an out-of-body experience might be beneficial for that. But a lot of what I read about depression is that people already feel quite disassociated, and it's actually that is a source of depression. I'm wondering more about the vagus nerve stimulation. Is something like that perhaps a suitable tool for that kind of thing?
Okay. Let's open this out as well to other people. Other people use these devices, got an experience of this.
So I'd say like depression is kind of it's where people get locked in like a mental loop most of the time, where it seems to be like where there's like the neurons have gotten stuck in a loop and they kind of think they get caught in it, and it's very easy to do in this day and age. That's why it's kind of 1 in 3 people have like some form of like depression, I think, these days. And I think it's because
when you say a mental loop, you mean a loop of like a thought process that...
I think kind of a thought process, and I think things like routine can sort of help instigate that, you know, when people are kind of doing the same thing every day over and over and over again, and you sort of end up feeling like a caged rat in that sense. But then the thing is, anyone can escape it at any point, really, but they'd have to sort of just break out and just realise that they can, which would be to escape or to change something or to start changing stuff. And so with like the cyberdelics, you know, like sort of like trying to get the psychedelic experience with virtual reality, then you can kind of inspire that within people with experiences to maybe pick things up.
Possibility of changing their routine in a way, of changing the way of thinking.
So the reason why ketamine's being used by Johnson & Johnson now as an antidepressant in America, and how it's going to come over here probably within the next decade at some point, is because it seems to bring like a childlike wonder to people, and so it makes people kind of open up their neuroplasticity again, and so that seems to be certainly a big component of this, which is to have wonderment and to bring neuroplasticity. And I think some of this new technology and some of the stories and immersive experiences that we can give can do that and bring wonderment. I mean, like Tilt Brush, for example, like instantly, like, whoa, this is like a beautiful thing where you're creating like 3D models in space, and it's
so it's a very straightforward way of treating depression by creating wonder.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
But also could depends on conscious observations, because for instance, if you're depressed, you never talking in the loop, like you never observe your thoughts. You're always acting and never actually observing from a third person point of view.
Yeah.
And so that's related as well to meditative states, and that's why out of body through technology is important. Because then you can observe yourself from another perspective, and that gives you another point of view, and it makes you focus also on your thought processes as well, and that's what happens in meditation as well.
Right. So
when you're observing how your thoughts and how everything relates to yourself, and then you're getting a bit detached from you, and you're actually observing how everything works. I don't know if it makes sense, but. You do observe your thoughts, and therefore you detach yourself and say, okay, it's fine, never mind, let's just let these thoughts flowing and let's keep on going.
So it gives you a different context in a way.
It's another perspective.
Yeah, another perspective, yeah. Yep.
There was a short film that Louis showed as part of Sci Fi London, which was about virtual reality addicts. And it was about people preferring the VR world to their real world. And I was just wondering, do you think there's any danger of you becoming regulated in that sense that the powers that be might feel
this is too dangerous?
too dangerous, either for individuals in general or for certain personalities who prefer...
The biggest danger.
Prefer the alternative reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Japan looking at the problem of these guys that just literally log out of society. They get to a certain age and then they get all their food delivered, and that's just with like a screen and gaming. So when you can start to be fully immersed in these environments and then wear body sensors and be in the game, you're going to have people logging out completely. But then, reality is under construction, right? So it's a question of and that's why I show a lot of examples from a lot of artists that are actually doing these things and hacking into these systems rather than the corporations that are totally going to fuck around with this stuff. And I think it's about literacy. It's about actually knowing what's possible and not letting other people create your visions for you, which I know we talked about the sci-fi.
So you're a little bit worried that potentially this technology is so powerful it could actually fall into the wrong hands.
It's gonna fall into the wrong hands, but it's a question of making sure that we get there first and we create these realities for ourselves.
Okay.
I think one of the examples that Carl showed is an example of where I'd like to see the technology go, and certainly the technology I've been creating has been centered on that, which is if you look at the magnetic belt, for example, it's not meant to be worn forever. It's just meant to activate something in you, and then you take it off, and you've got that ability to use that.
Do you know how it works? How does it work? Because to me, it just looked like a belt with some wires off
Well,
of it.
I'll just make this comment, then Carl perhaps can cover that. But I think if we can create technologies which wake up or support what we're doing to a degree where we don't need them after a while, and then it's a bit like a crutch. If you've got a broken leg, you need a crutch to heal, but then after a time when your leg's healed, you don't want the crutch anymore, otherwise it interferes with your ability to walk. So I think we need technologies which operate in that kind of fashion that you can remove after a while because they've done their job and you don't need them anymore, and they've enabled us to be more empowered.
Okay, so it's a route to a greater perception rather than... I think I'll come to you in a second, but I just want to go back to how this belt actually works.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's a magnetic belt, and you've got other systems like it. There's a company called Intuition Machines that are using smart materials, and it's a sort of very subliminal way of dealing with direction. So it's like the sort of very primitive hot and cold. You're going in the right direction. So it's a device that actually heats up if you're going in the right direction, and it starts to cool down if you're not. But another example...
Is it always the right direction, always north? Or is it
no, I mean that's
a different system.
That's a different system. But the point of that is that say you're watching Andy Murray play tennis, but you can't watch it.
Yeah.
This smart material will continue to heat up if he's winning, but if he's not winning anymore, it'll start. So it's sort of it's without having to be there. You sort of have it's subliminally knowing what's going on.
Right.
And I like that. So it doesn't interfere with your cognition. It's just something that's going on at a lower level.
It's a bit sometimes like I have the football on in the background, but I can only really hear the crowd.
Yeah.
So you sort of know.
Yeah, exactly. Subliminally.
What's actually happening in the game.
I just wondered if there is anywhere that I could find out about anything to do with nutrition and, how there are, what's going on in that field.
You're talking about the expanding and shrinking donut thing.
I don't know.
Well, there was a thing on the screen.
Yeah, smart foods and that kind of thing. Yeah, so that would be interesting to me.
Okay, let's hear a little bit about the field of.
Yeah, my master's degree is in molecular biology and drug research, specifically looking at anaesthetics and things that work on the brain. And one of the things that came out of that research was looking at what works on the nervous system in terms of food. And typically it's anything which is high in certain kinds of ionic content, like potassium, calcium, things like that. And I actually went on a juice diet for quite a while, just to get the pure nutrients into me and see what effect it had, and it was phenomenal. I ended up being clearer, more creative, less likely to feel sad in inappropriate ways, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. There must be a specific chemistry then, which comes from nutrients, from your food, not necessarily from drugs or pills, which if you just got those things in a natural, live, vitalized kind of way, your nervous system would wake up. And your synapses would be a lot more communicative with one another in an interconnected way to generate creativity. So there's actually a whole kind of science which looks at that. But suffice to say, it's fundamentally to do with ions, positive and negative ions, like calcium, potassium and others, and specific proportions of those that you get through certain kinds of foods. And if you take them out of their context of their natural foods and you try and put them in a pill, it doesn't work the same way.
Okay. Is there particularly good juice for creativity?
If you want to boost your brain a little bit, then it's good to use superfoods. For example, if you take avocado, it's a meal in itself, but it's good to mix it with other things which provide it with the context. For example, ginger and things like cinnamon are pretty good things to add. But it turns out, many of you might not know this, but your blood sugar levels really seriously affect the way that you function in terms of your clarity and your ability to think and your moods. Well, what I was about to say was cinnamon, a quarter teaspoon, has been shown over a month to reduce diabetics' need for insulin by 30%. So that's just taking a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon every day. Now, when you mix it with things like turmeric and coconut, it provides antiviral, antifungal, and other properties which actually improve your gut flora and make your bacteria a bit more healthy in terms of digestion. And that in itself affects how your brain functions.
Okay, so the gut really affects the brain. That's the point over there.
First of all, sugar,
Come closer. My arm's not that long. In fact, grab the mic.
Okay. Sugar gives the signal to brain that is basically satisfaction. Everything is there, so we kill all natural signals where our body will tell us, oh, I need this, I need that, because it's straight away the high point of your brain. So, and obviously the pill won't work in the same way because it's the whole matter of getting into the habit and having this moment of actually making juice and making the right decision of drinking it. And it takes a longer time, where the pill you can just take it completely unconsciously, so it won't affect you.
So you subscribe to this idea of foods in a way controlling our reality or altering our reality?
Of course, because we are overeating. We're overeating, so our bodies are busy with digesting, and the whole blood from the brain, it goes to the body, so we all being sleepy, basically,
right.
And then eating sugar to just have the satisfaction and have the feeling of actual. So yes, of course, it does affect your brain because.
Yeah. Okay, so it's actually earlier on we were talking about being in a collective state of sleepwalking. I didn't think this conversation would go down the food route, but maybe it is an element that food is a technology,
I just wanted to add that whether it's ayahuasca or whether it's DMT or something else, to another, who knows whether an alien civilization didn't put this stuff down here and it's actually technology, but we're mistaking it as being something to do with a plant or some food. I'm just kidding. I'm really just kidding. Yeah, okay. But what I'm saying really is that food can itself be considered to be a form of technology, except it, when it serves us, we don't look at it as technology. We just think, oh, it's just something we do. Okay. And we've been doing it for thousands of years.
Are we sort of ignoring the role of food in immersive arts and virtual reality?
I was just going to follow up on whether the aliens had put this stuff down here. Just to recommend, because there's a book I read when I was a teenager called The Mind Parasites by a writer called Colin Wilson, which is about exactly that, and about how the human brain over time has dimmed down its powers, and in the end they all redevelop their psychokinetic powers, realise the parasites are coming from the moon and roll the moon away. That's the story. I did a concept album about that too.
Okay, well, maybe we should get that on the sound system. But is there something about our sense of our powers of perception and lucidity, which is down to, I guess, what's going on in our gut? Because we've not really talked so much about guts so far this weekend.
So I'm the lead. Well, I was the lead developer on a project that just got invested $2 million on Thursday. But it's an Internet of Things that captures your biometrics and your nutrition every time you stand in front of it, and so you gradually get this data correlating. You start to see correlations in your nutrition and in your biometrics. So like from your weight, from your height, from the heat, from your heart rate, And so the things, and just like the magnetic belt, over time you would start seeing these biometrics and these correlations, and then you start getting a feel for it, and you start going like, wait, every time I eat broccoli, I seem to like get this thing, my heart rate goes up, and if you start adding in like blood detection as well, and you start like putting your blood into it, starting breathalyzers, then you can really analyze everything that's going on in the body, and you just get like some sort of like body TARDIS that you kind of go into and you take things. And this particular startup, that's kind of what they're aiming for. But that's where nutrition is going to get this.
I mean, it fits in with what we've been talking about, really, in terms of just another mode of perception about ourselves that we just haven't really thought about, or it's not really adopted in the commonplace. I'm keen to. What do other people think about this? There's some other people that haven't said anything. Any thoughts? Would you like to visualise your body in terms of what foods you eat?
It's a very important rule. Like, if you want to trip, then never trip when you feel bad, because it will affect how you feel, and like whatever perception and whatever state of mind, it will be always same. Just whenever you take the psychedelic drugs, it is stronger, and then you can have like real vision. So if you're gonna feel bad, it's gonna affect your trip,
Is that the same with cyberdelics as well? That because you're saying if you're feeling bad in cyberdelics, you can break out of that. You can treat depression, you can treat bad moods, but in psychedelics, you can't. It just makes it worse. So,
Jazz was going to say.
I think what's important is to look at whether there's three things going on, whether there's something being diminished, whether something's being amplified, or the middle ground is whether something's being restored or balanced with a combination of those things. Now, the fact is that more often than not, when you take these kinds of substances, they tend to amplify things more than anything else, and they tend to do it to a bigger degree than undermining or diminishing other things. And if your body doesn't have the capacity to handle concentrations of various hormones and other things that get triggered when these things activate in your body, then your nervous system, your immune system, and other systems all get out of kilter with each other. One of the consequences of that is that you will feel internally disassociated, and often that comes across in terms of a sense of high anxiety or a sense of panic, and that won't leave you for quite a while. So there can be after effects which will not go away, and they may permanently change you psychologically. So there's negative things here as well as positive things, and the rule is that you try and get yourself as together as possible in all ways, physically, psychologically, and otherwise, socially as well, before you go into this experience, because the most together and functional you are before you go into it, the least likely you're going to have negative side effects, and the more likely, if there are any, you'll be able to have the resilience to cope with them and more enjoy the positive aspects.
Are we talking about psychedelics rather than cyberdelics?
It applies equally. It applies equally. That's what I found, that whether you're taking a drug or whether you're sticking a bit of technology on, if you're screwed up to start with, trust me, you're more at risk getting screwed up more afterwards.
What about the question, because it's been raised by a number of people, of using this technology for therapeutic uses? You're not going to be in that good state of mind. You're going to be in a slightly diminished state of mind. So
I'd say one thing about that. I work with addicts at the Priory, and also with mental health patients at the South Tottenham Mental Health Trust, and we use technology to track how they were changing through mindfulness programs, but we also use technology to guide them as to how to improve. But that was all done under guidance, and that was presented later at the NHS gathering with doctors, and it was shown to be really, really useful. However, if you are put into a car and someone tells you this is how you get it started and get it moving, that's not enough for you to drive it safely. You need to be aware of other things, signs, looking through the mirror, what's going on outside, how to drive on an icy road compared to other things. You need to have some safety mechanisms learnt first before you're allowed to drive that car. Otherwise, you're probably going to crash it.
Okay.
I think, and I think what you're saying is really fascinating. I'd actually like to go back to the slide which looks at where consciousness originates from, inside the brain or outside. Are our minds acting as radios, picking up signals, and is it something that I think that's a really interesting point, because I think that's kind of a fundamental premise to a lot of things that are being shared today. I think we've gone too far. We've gone the other way.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting, because everything's talking about the body being affected by a substance or by. That's the one.
What's going on with this?
Go back. That's the one. Stop it. That one.
Yeah.
Stop. Would you mind kind of elaborating on that?
Well, actually, Matteo probably knows a little bit more about this than I do, but I think it's difficult to say in terms of Olaf Blank is a materialist. He definitely believes that we can create these outer bodies and like this presence with just transcranial stimulation. I've had experiences that I could, there's just definitely.
Have you tried this?
No, I haven't tried this particular thing. I've had out of body experiences that I would put down to DMT rather than some sort of. But it's an interesting side to this whole debate. I'm completely open-minded when it comes to this stuff. But all I know is that the kind of experiences I've had would suggest that the brain is actually produced by consciousness rather than the other way around.
So, again, my feeling is everything that I've read and that I mentioned would lead me to understand that we are able to access one collective consciousness.
Right.
We are tapping into something. We're picking up on something that's shared, and what is in the way is what needs to be removed from.
In your view, what is in the way?
There's we're very basically talk about the ego self. This is something that we kind of tapped on yesterday. Let's call it the ego, the identity that we hold on to within the physicality of the smaller. All great religions allude to this one truth. Everything that I've understood has been pointing to this, and technology for me is an enabler to access that one collective consciousness.
So this is basically a vehicle to access a collective consciousness, potentially.
Potentially, yeah, and it's kind of like, what are the things that we experience, and the things we talk about moods, and we talk about things being affected. I'm always interested to say, well, can we break through that? Ultimately, what is being affected, and what is receiving or accessing that information, and what are we responding to in ourselves? I mean, I'm just going to open that up to the floor.
Okay, what do people think of what's that?
I guess awareness.
Yeah.
Of the whatever states, if we are aware, this is where we are again able to make the consciousness result.
Do you believe in this idea of a collective consciousness that could be tapped into?
I guess so.
Okay.
Can I have a go?
I'll go around. Hang on a sec, Carl.
Well, yeah, I researched a lot about this idea of consciousness and the collective consciousness, and there's a lot of data.
You're gesticulating too much to the microphone.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information around us in nature that it's embedded, and like we don't normally see it, although it's like hidden and everywhere. And there's like sets of patterns, and they all correlate to each other, whether it's a plant or our organs.
Yeah.
And the idea that we always live in this like physical world where everything seems so like solid and very physical, and since the moment we're born, we're always like used to like perceive through our senses, and we learn day by day how to relate to this environment. But this is just like the surface level of it, because at the end there's like the space that is in between like molecules and atoms is like huge. It's like the universe, and the idea that we never focus on ourselves and we just focus on the physical world, that doesn't help at all. That's why meditation is so important, because you can focus on your thought processes and your physical construction, so then it makes you more aware.
Okay, so go away from the material dimension to some kind of other, all of that empty space.
But I think there's certainly confusion with like consciousness and these kind of things, and universe and God and stuff. I think of that people are getting their nouns and their verbs mixed up.
Nouns and verbs?
Well, like consciousness is a descriptive thing. It's part of a whole, and it's that is.
So it's an adjective.
Oh, adjective. Sorry, yeah, description. Yeah, sorry. It's an adjective rather than like a noun. And I think that's the thing with the material world we are kind of dealing with now. We are dealing with these like physical objects, and then you got things which are sort of descriptive, which are these kind of wholes or things or actions. You know, like consciousness is like running. It's frames of time of the brain being captured as it goes along, and so it's running. It's like saying like, what is running? Can we capture running? And that's the thing. And it's like, well, that's what's part of it. And collective consciousness is definitely a thing. But it is just the consciousness of everyone's running, interacting, everyone's running into each other. So yeah, that's causing like a...
So in a way, it's a different question to sort of like describe the phenomenon of collective consciousness and to know or understand what it is.
That's right. The one thing that confuses me, and I touched on this before at the event that we had, is I'm not quite sure. It seems to be like sort of ideologically shallow in a kind of way to want a collective consciousness. I'd have thought consciousness is by definition individual, and I'm not quite sure.
Why do you think it's shallow to want this?
Well, it's because it seems to me it becomes more of a sort of sociological, political, ideological thing, which is in some sense a sort of levelling thing, which to me is very anti-creative, is anti-being an individual. You know, I'm not quite sure that the striving for this thing which we all share, which we're not quite tapping into, which is why I'm not religious. You know,
you don't want to dissolve
which is
your
what
ego.
you were talking about.
You sort of like your ego, and you think it's an important kind of authorial kind of...
I just think, you know, you can have 50,000 people, you know, Glastonbury, all listening to the same piece of music. I said this before, but the way they're experiencing it will all be different because, like, they're all different combinations of chemicals and experiences and everything. So I'm not quite sure, you know, how you know, or what the point is in trying to level this in the sense of it being something that's the same for everyone.
I think if you look at the internet, there's thousands of computers all connected to the internet, yet each person can be looking at a particular website or a particular page which is different from what everybody else is looking at. And a few years back when I was doing my astrophysics degree, my final year I was studying results that come out of CERN particle physics experiments, and one of those bits of research I was looking at, and it was about how a particle, when its qualities were changed, influenced another particle at a distance instantaneously. And the only way it can be described is that rather than thinking of these things as separate, is that they were never separated. They were always connected at a fundamental level.
A cosmic whole.
So separately from consciousness, there seems to be an interconnectedness built into the universe, courtesy of quantum physics, or whatever you like to call it. And I think there are a couple of consequences to that. You can look at everything being interconnected, just like the internet interconnects everything, but beyond the internet, there are these places, there are these domains where people are doing their own things independently of what's on the internet. I can run Microsoft Word on my computer, and somebody else could be running, you know, a game on theirs, but we both might be connected to the internet at the same time. Now, we're doing very individual things, even though we're very interconnected.
So, well, I mean, okay, but I think there's this question about, I don't think it really answers the question about, I guess the political side of this is collective consciousness in a way. I feel you think it's some kind of almost like escape and a sort of like you're kind of like in a way.
It's like wanting to belong to the same club, which is something I instinctively never wanted to belong to someone else's club.
You're an
That's what I'm saying. I think I'm prepared to accept some sort of spiritual aspect, that there may be something. It's almost like a shared fantasy is fine. Which is what a lot of religious people have, obviously, but I'm not quite sure in scientific terms whether it's going to get anywhere, really, because it's so individual, like you were saying, to what you've put into your body, to what you eat, to what you are. You know, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Yep.
Okay, sorry. Well, I don't know. From my point of view, like, we're all part of the same system of information, and I'm not saying that, I'm just generalizing it, like the collective consciousness is like what include all of us, and I don't know, let's just take it for granted. But the idea is like individuality is important, but at the surface level, because then we all have like conscious observation that is unique to us, to ourselves, and just us. In that sense, even at the quantum level, like that conscious observation, like looking at one particle, and it can affect its behavior just by observing it. So it means that whatever we perceive through our senses is just our own. But it doesn't mean that, even as Jess said, like, we're always interconnected at the smallest scale. Even though we split one photon, and then they go like on the opposite side of the universe, and then we do something to one, and on the other side it happens the same thing. Then it means that there's some sort of interconnection that is beyond space and time that we cannot perceive because we live in space and time. We have no idea what's beyond that. So it's like kind of speculating onto nothing because we don't know really.
So right now we might be messing up some other corner of the universe just by having this conversation. Well, we don't know.
Curious to get back to this gentleman's point about, I'm a little bit fuzzy about the term itself, collective consciousness. I mean, it's something that gets used in very different ways under different sort of levels of scrutiny. And for me, I don't know if it means anything. I feel it's too misused to actually have a concrete definition. And does that mean it's not susceptible to scientific scrutiny?
Carl over here was saying that it's just an adjective in a way that describes certain phenomenons of synchronicity.
I mean, are we talking about, say, telepathy here? If that's what we're talking about, then suddenly that raises a lot of alarm bells with me.
All right, I'm going to turn the mirror. What would you want collective consciousness to be?
Well, it's a concept that I don't know if we could prove phenomenologically. Like, can you actually produce a test that would verify it is a thing one way or the other?
Real or not, but what would you
mean? What would I say it is?
What do you want it to be?
Well, I want it to be like an internet of the minds.
Like a kind of telepathy.
Yeah, like an optional, so something that doesn't destroy the ego, but I want to dial Mikey when he's in Hungary and go, Mikey, quick, I need that recipe for goulash, what is it? And him to just broadcast that to me. That's, to me, what a collective consciousness would be. But I don't, but this is it, but then we've just got language, so it feels like an odd thing to...
And we've got mobile phones as well.
But we're lazy.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah.
Just what these guys are doing, which I thought is really interesting, is that they're making an experience in which you're actually looking at yourself, which I think is a far more important and useful tool. I mean, I think that people have an extreme lack of consciousness about themselves is the real problem with the world. And if you can develop some sense of empathy about what it's like to be somebody else, that for me is the best. Empathy is essentially the best collective consciousness you can have.
Okay, hang on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely crucial, and it comes back to this power of out-of-body experience. I mean, 20 years ago, one of the colleagues I was working with in Japan, he was strapping a camera onto to his back as he was going skiing, and actually watching himself ski from outside of his body to see how bad his technique was.
Right.
And now you've got these drones, these sort of selfie drones that will look at you from out of your body, and you can observe what you're doing from this sort of out-of-body perspective. I've got a friend that actually filmed herself from the corner of her room for 6 months and used some visual analytics to see what she was doing actually and how she perceived herself.
What were the dissonances?
Massive dissonance. And she said that the way she thought she treated people, her co-workers, seemed to be completely at odds with actually how she was treating them.
In what way?
Well, just like the way she was, her body language with them, and the way she was treating them, and she thought she was a very lovely person to be with, and actually it turned out, according to the evidence, it wasn't the case.
That's really interesting. So some of those very simple things give you this amazing insight.
Absolutely.
But we're just simply not doing it. How simple is it just to put a camera in the corner of your room? You don't even need a drone or anything like that. You just need a GoPro, or even something simpler than that. Yeah. But go on, it's your turn.
I think that's very interesting, that particular case study, because a lot of let's say spiritual disciplines teach you about breaking the ego through self-reflection, but technology can actually observe you and give you the same feedback based on a different mode of nothing at all. So you can almost say technology is a new religion of the modern age, in teaching us how to grow into
better people.
Yeah, for example.
I mean, I could just ask, because you don't really like the ego. You like the ego. Yeah, but he wants to break the ego.
Who likes the ego?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Let's just finish this off. Yeah.
No, just being more self-aware, and I think that's what we're talking about, is becoming more self-aware and breaking old habits that can be quite destructive through different methods, different tools, technology, meditation, mindfulness, health, ayahuasca, nutrition, etc., etc. There's all different paths up the mountain.
Okay. I'll come to you in a sec. Sorry, Jazz.
No, I just wanted to say that when we talk about out-of-body experiences, it's key to stress the fact that it's not just about the sight or what you're watching that gives the sense of an out-of-body, because there's all the other senses that we have to keep in mind that we have to stimulate in order to achieve a real out-of-body induction, because otherwise you're just looking at yourself, but you don't actually feel what you're looking at. So you have to stimulate your physical body in synchronicity to what's happening in the VR world. So then your brain is like 100% like tricked, and like in a matter of seconds, really, like you really feel that you're embodying that person, that avatar in the virtual reality, which that's what triggers the out of body. It's not just that happens just by watching it something. It's the whole idea of hacking the senses that then brings you out of that your own physical body.
But
and that's
I
what's
think
cool.
the point that Carl's making is that you don't have to go that far to gain insights. You can just go do something very simple.
Well, yeah, it could, but you have to stimulate everything. Otherwise, it doesn't really work, I think.
Okay, Jess.
Tibetans say that compassion is the most powerful force in the universe, and they say it because of the reason, because it allows a person to engage with the truth in an empowering way. And I did some research with British Telecom a few years ago, training up their customer service agents on empathy, and what I found was that more often than not, they weren't demonstrating empathy with customers, they were demonstrating sympathy. And sympathy is just acknowledging someone but not actually sharing the experience of what they're going through. Whereas empathy is the opposite. It doesn't need acknowledgement, but you're at least conscious and experiencing what they're going through. So the biggest problem, though, was that the agents didn't have empathy for themselves. And because they didn't have empathy for themselves, they often got into situations which led them to be really upset. And it maybe the customer gets upset and they get excited. But I think that's a big problem. Just like charity, empathy begins at home. If you can't relate to yourself, then how can you possibly, connect or do anything creative with anybody else?
Okay.
Instead of going down, continuing on that thought, it's looking down at someone. It's almost condescending, as opposed to going down to their level and pulling them out of their space. I remember I've seen something very similar to that. It's the looking down as opposed to the going down and reaching back, and that's the big difference. But you have to first be able to do that with yourself.
You have to
be able to do that with yourself, or be willing to go on that journey with someone else.
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of empathy with yourselves, I'm starting to get a little bit overwhelmed with all these ideas. So we can do two things. We can carry this on if Rowan jumps in the middle. We can just move straight on to the demos. But if we're going to do that, let's just maybe get some final thoughts for this session, because that will improve my sense of closure for all of this. And what's that? Okay, well, what's your final thought? Maybe, do you want to bring it back to technology?
No, I don't. Pass it over to...
Okay, well, let's get final thoughts.
I'd like to say it's really important that, at this moment, that we use technology in a really useful way for ourselves, for our senses, and see where we can get with this idea of consciousness. Because we can talk about this for days, but we never reach the point where we all agree on one thing, because it's so experiential and individual. The point is experience. That's what it matters. That's where you learn from mainly, because we can talk about consciousness, as I said, but unless you don't experience it, then you're never gonna believe it, or you're never gonna know what it is about.
Right.
So,
well, luckily
experience is the key.
We're going to move on to some experiences.
I will give the final thought. Virtual reality is an empathy engine. Maybe that would be it.
Okay. Any initial thoughts or final thoughts? Final thought?
She's got one.
What's that?
Yeah, I would say it has the potential to be, but it really depends what you do with it. Yeah. Okay. So technology has to serve a bigger purpose. So if you just use it for the sake of it, then we can make nice things, but then they stay where they are, and they're not going to act on any consciousness level or whatever else we discussed.
Okay, final thoughts?
One of the things I learned about empathy was that it's important to be able to relate to someone who they authentically are, but also their vulnerabilities too. And if you can do that in a way which empowers them and empowers yourself in the process, then that's a technology in itself. Now, if you get an actual technology which can connect people up authentically and link them up by their vulnerabilities without harming them, but actually empowering them, then you've got a genuine empathy engine. And these are the kind of things that me and Carl are kind of working on, practically delivering.
Okay, final thoughts? Yep.
Don't want to be a downer on this, but not all people are great, and you don't want to empathise with everyone. and
don't empathise with bad people.
Yes, I mean there is a percentage of people who you don't want to have any empathy with, and you need to be able to create technology that can, that you can put a brake on to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay. You think you do want to have empathy, but you've had your final thought. I've got no sympathy or empathy with you. You've had your final thought. Final thought? Yeah.
I just want to say, I think it's incredibly impressive what you guys are doing, and I think it's something that I'm trying to embrace as being, a new way to try and influence the world in a positive way. I'm a film composer, so I've been trying in my kind of way, what I've been doing for 30 years is trying to influence the way people feel when they're watching stuff. And I feel quite helpless and pathetic in relation to what you are really constructively trying to do, and I just want to applaud you for it, because I think it's...
Would you consider stimulating the vagus nerve in your music from...
I'm sure music, there's obviously been a lot of research about the way music affects people's brains, and clearly it does have a huge effect, but I don't think it's quantifiable, thank God. If it was, we'd have more rubbish pop songs than we already do.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to comment on what the guy behind you was saying about not wanting to empathise with nasty people. I think actually we really need to do that, and I think it's really important to have a really wide range of experience in our lives, from the worst kinds of experience to the most positive, and then the range in between is what makes you human. And I'm really interested in the fact that we can sort of enter a schizophrenic's mind. There's simulations for that. I think that these things are super powerful for post-traumatic stress syndrome. People can relive their worst experiences in the knowledge that they're in a room and in a safe space. So I'm really fascinated by the potentials for these things for mental health.
Okay, you've had your final thought, sorry.
So I was going to say it has to be controlled.
All right, one more. Okay, one other.
I think that's a brilliant point, but it's just the controlling of that process, because what you're tapping into is something like Hitler or another Stalin.
Okay. Okay, manipulation. Okay, you haven't had your final thought yet, so final thought.
Sorry.
Have you got final thought? No, you have had your final thought, haven't you?
Yeah.
You had the first final thought. Okay.
In the middle of it.
Have you had a final thought? Oh, okay, right.
So I guess two things. I guess consciousness, just like when we had the same problem with spirituality the other day, which I think is a messy word, and I think it needs to be split up into different concepts, because I think we're all talking about different things here. So let's try and split that up and sort of work out the difference between these different types of consciousness. And
for you, what's the most interesting kind of subsection of consciousness that you want to talk about that's a bit more specific?
I guess it does come with sort of awareness, I guess, or sort of consciousness, like these kind of other things that you can pick up, like nutritional things, like of in yourself, when you start recognizing things that you can, or empathy, which is certainly a part of consciousness that we can tap into, and with things like virtual reality, just like the magnetic belt, it can train your empathy. So it doesn't have to be direct. So you don't have to, for every single person, you would need to go through a virtual reality experience of their current position to empathize with them. But you can at least sort of train it to kind of be like, oh, okay, and then you can just start doing it, because it's something that loads of us that have awakened that ability within ourselves, we can kind of get it. You can kind of be like, oh, I wouldn't want to be in solitary confinement. Fuck that, that'd be horrible. It shouldn't be like that. And because you just kind of put yourself in that mind, and you can sort of do it. And I think it's more about learning the skill rather than doing it constantly.
Okay, well, this has been Talkaoke with no more final thought. Oh, you haven't had your final thought, have you? Yeah, okay.
I was thinking along the same lines, the terminology is something that worries me quite a bit. I mean, I preach like being open-minded but skeptical, because a lot of what we talk about is on such a fringe area of knowledge that it's very tempting to kind of meander down a path that actually doesn't really lead anywhere but sounds very convincing. And you found this throughout history of any area of science. But but don't stop exploring, but be conscious of yourself, which leads into what a lot of you guys have been saying, like always self-analyze and be empathetic to yourself before thinking about others.
Okay, this has been Talkaoke. Thanks very much. I'm thinking about Rick now, who's had to film it all. And okay, and hang on a sec, because this is all the build-up to.
Yeah, the demo that we're about to do consists of 4 things, 2 technical things involving technology and a couple of things which is just the human-to-human stuff. So we're going to have a mind-controlled helicopter demonstration. We're going to look at some bionic hearing. And in between, we're going to do some workshops where you get to feel energy and forces between you and wake up some faculties in that regard. And the last couple of things we're going to do are remote viewing, where you get to hack your senses and see into other regions of space and time. And the very last demo, hopefully, will be the one with the Oculus and cameras, where we start doing out-of-body stuff. Okay. So that's the sequence. So if you want to, we're doing that over the next 2 hours, about half an hour or so each. So you're welcome to join us in the other room where we're going to be doing it all. Thank you.
The room next door. Yeah. Okay, and that's happening right now. Big round of applause for everybody. Amazing stuff.
Big round of applause for you.
And we've got
Mikey.
Carol Barter.
And you all are here with a specific project or something today as well?
No, not really. I'm just here just to steal other people's ideas.
Okay.
I'm Rob Easton, Clearview, and I'm sort of developing VR museums at the moment. So yeah, that's my.
Okay. Cool. We've got a broad range. Anyone want to come and sit down as well? So give us your name.
Carl.
And we've got Carl as well.
Hi. Yes.
Cool. And so my name is Rowan. And what should we start with? You sort of started a bit of a direction here, talking about your involvement with counterculture and the rave scene, and touched on sort of psychedelic.
From the 60s to the 90s, we covered, with our magazine Encyclopedia Psychedelica, we covered 2 revolutions: the 60s psychedelic revolution and the 90s rave culture, which both had tremendous effects on the planet. And it involved music, technology, and the underground. Mm-hmm. Both Fiona and I were big part of the rave thing, with Evolution magazine, which was
very rare. Is that your new magazine, old magazine?
No, that was a classic of the period. Sure, have a look.
Grab a seat. And so, what
it's mainly about technology, music, and change.
Technology,
and
music,
the possibility of transforming human beings into more conscious beings.
Okay, and that was the goal you set out to
make people more conscious of themselves.
And I'll come to Mikey. I'm just kind of curious about, just in a nutshell, what made you begin this kind of thing, this journey?
Just the society that we lived around seemed very materialistic, and so, as in the 60s, it was a revolt against the prevailing materialistic society. We wanted something a bit more conscious. Of course, drugs came into it, which were great catalysts. LSD in the 60s, ecstasy in the 90s, but it led to something positive and good.
Okay. Mikey, you had your hand up.
No, I mean, I don't want to sort of put a kind of downer on it, but I'm just, when you said like counterculture, it made me think of like in a way the kind of counterculture, that all of these things, such as the rave scene, such as these kind of new ways of thinking, then seem to be taken up by larger bodies and be used almost against their original purpose. And having seen these 2 revolutions, do you think that's a kind of just how it goes?
There were actually 3 revolutions in all, if you think of the jazz revolution of the 20s, which also had its spiritual side. Always you'll get the carpet, but to answer your question, you'll get the carpetbag. It's coming along, monopolizing the style, sending it out, and becoming mainstream corruption sort of thing. I think now what I've seen now happening with James and this scene here, there's a possibility of a 4th wave happening, and I think this is happening now with your new technology coming along. That's very positive. You'll always get, after the thing has happened, people coming along and co-opting it who were never a part of it in the first place, to answer your question.
But do you ever worry that some people are engineering it in a way, though?
I think as long as the genuine ones are there, that the good rises to the top. I'm an optimist in that sense, even though afterwards it might become corrupt or there's always that chance.
Any thoughts on these revolutions?
I'm actually more concerned about an increasing level of disengagement that people are having with their communities and with their neighbours, and I think social media is contributing to that. People who just stay at home in their computers, not in their computers, well, pretty soon in their computers with virtual reality, but hiding behind their computers perhaps. And there's the level of aggression and abuse and just unpleasantness you find in social media seems indicative of that to me. I'm a bit worried that virtual reality, I mean, it has a lot of positive things going for it, but you may well find in some quarters, that it will just encourage people just staying in with their headsets on, whatever that means. I mean, as the world outside looks less and less attractive to go out into, and VR more rewarding.
So should we fear social networking and the kind of the interconnectedness because it's actually isolating us a bit more?
I agree with that, but I also think that with the technologies like Google just had a patent put through on a new lens which will allow you to have or be integrated with social media and also integrate. So they have the initial technology using light onto into the pube. I don't know obviously the ins and out of the technology because that's the whole kind of. But they have to be able to put the patent through in the first place. They have to have some sort of basis to put it through. You can't patent an idea.
Hang on, well, let's wait for the mic. So.
No, this is an example of just plain land grabbing. They figure that somebody's going to invent this thing. They may be on top of the curve. Hell, let's get in there and patent it, and therefore claim that we did it first. I know quite a bit about optics, and I have no idea. The things I've seen indicate no way of doing this. Yes, you can perhaps form an image on whatever it is you stick on the front of your eye. It doesn't form an image on your retina. Unlike it's been done. How does it work?
So could we just get a little bit of clarity on what it was you were saying, or are you able to summarise?
Yeah, I think I can sum it. So it's not Google who have the patent. Google have invested in a company called Magic Leap, who have painted it and invented. People have used this technology. There are prototypes around of the technology that's been developed by Magic Leap. And the way that it works, unlike all of the headsets we see here, which are basically mobile phone screens that use optics to distort the image that is displayed on that panel, with Magic Leap they have small projectors that project light directly onto your retina and draw the image on your retina. And what that means is, in terms of resolution, which we obviously have problems with resolution with the panels here, you're not getting that because it's not pixel based. No, this is project. This is. Right.
So can we just clarify then what you were talking about, and let's see what.
So that is a contact lens, which again I agree. You're probably right about they've put a kind of basis down on a technology which hasn't been developed enough yet to. Yeah. But again, straight back down to kind of that point with the HoloLens and Magic Leap, it again gives you the possibility to be engaged with everyone around you and also, be connected and be connected online with technology as well, which I think would be quite a advancement. If people want to use it or not is another kind of point.
So putting the specifics of the technology, the idea being that you could simultaneously be in reality and have a virtual thing, so augmented reality. Would that alleviate any worry about your fear, do you reckon, about social media taking over if you can still maintain a contact with reality?
Well, I just want to sort of challenge that idea that we live in this kind of alienated, aggressive society. But I mean, I was talking to Fiona earlier on about London in the 90s, and it was a much more violent place. And I don't think there's that. I think violent crime is actually going down. Now, I know that's not the same as aggression, but I think you use the word augmented. I think all these things augment each other, and I think it is inevitably there's a positive side to it. It's not all positive, but.
I think this is what underground counterculture is about. It's about knowing making you a better person to be able to use this technology. Otherwise, it's going to be in the hands of either the military or politicians. We have to have consciousness, a big part of any technological movement. We have to teach people how to know themselves, look inside. It's almost like a cliche. That has to be a big part of any technological advance.
Okay.
Right there.
Let me come back to you.
So, in your experience with the sort of two music, or the two scenes which are very dominated by music from the counterculture point of view, do you see a sort of disjoint with, virtual reality, and for some of the reasons that you mentioned being isolating? That I think I feel as though it's going to take quite a while before the sort of the technology is advanced enough to give a real sense of being in a space with someone in a way that wasn't a barrier to people connecting. And I wonder how that could hamper things.
Just bring that around.
I think that's a very good point, a good question, and I think that will happen gradually as people become familiar. And I don't know exactly how it will happen, that your most intimate self is shared with somebody that you don't know. I think that's still to be worked out. But I think again, to go back to the idea of being conscious, if you know a little bit about yourself, you'll be the judge, in a sense.
Fiona, you up?
Just like to say that my passion is about the fact that counterculture often starts the culture, and a lot of the people who in the counterculture are often written out of history. I was on the first internet radio station in the world in the 90s, along with Rob the Bank from Festival, and it was actually started by someone called Mad Ash. I'd love to know where Mad Ash is now. Broadcasting to 40,000 people around the world, most of them on army bases at the time, and it was so ahead of its time that, when we used to try and get people to listen in, people just weren't even interested, because remember, people weren't even using the internet apart from the army in those days. And what I've seen is that a lot of culture that we accept now as normal is often started by these alternative people who maybe are not leading mainstream lives, sometimes taking drugs to expand their mind. And I find all of that very interesting, and because they're not into money necessarily or publicity, often in the course of history these people disappear. And that's why I think counterculture is very important to culture, and especially in the 90s, where a lot of this stuff was, the internet was really starting to take hold. I used to go to Siberia, the first internet cafe in Good Street, and I just find that part of the history very interesting, and it's often something that's not documented. My comment about social media is I'm actually a promoter. I've done quite a few parties in the last few years since social media has been going again. I used to do big raves in the 90s, and I think social media used in the right hands is incredibly, brings people together. I mean, I've met people from all parts of my life, from the late 70s to now, through social media, many of whom I never would have seen again ever if there hadn't been social media around. It can be abused, but it also can bring people together, and I think, there's often a knee-jerk reaction because there's been a fight on Twitter or whatever, but I think, social media brings people together of all different backgrounds, different ages, and it's broken down a lot of barriers, and I see it an incredible way to promote people, especially people who maybe don't normally have a voice. I'm working with a lot of young black collectors at the moment who are using social media to promote themselves in the music industry and in fashion, and they're having incredible reactions from doing that, just from their bedrooms.
I'm curious to know if it's that a lot of people in the counterculture movement just aren't historians. I mean, it sounds like if they're not putting things out. Mikey had a question.
Well, I'm just going back to another conversation that happened at the V&A Museum, where they're doing an exhibition about counterculture, and somebody said, doesn't it all start off as counterculture? That is actually where culture originates, as a kind of reaction against something that isn't really working properly.
So you're saying is counterculture just a subset of culture?
No, it's not. It's the originating point of culture. Culture begins as counter, and then it becomes sucked up by the, as we were talking about earlier on, by the powers that be and by the mainstream.
So cultural paradigm shift in a way.
I think one of the reasons for that is people in counterculture often leading very alternative lifestyles. They don't actually have much money, and they come up with the ideas, but they can't take them further.
Yeah.
And so that's why they're taken up by obviously the corporates in the end and delivered. And one of the problems I find now with a lot of exhibitions, for instance, say like people like the V&A, is people who work at institutions like that, they don't have the contacts in counterculture. A lot of the people in counterculture, for instance, don't even have phones. A lot of them have rejected the internet because they feel, they feel that possibly, they have a paranoia about technology. So when often people do exhibitions, it's the same old talking heads that come forward to comment on this stuff. And actually, the people like Mad Ash, who invented the first internet radio station in the world, has probably disappeared somewhere because he's not actually very contactable. And I find that those, for me, are the people that are the most interesting, the people who've almost gone off the radar.
But then if they've chosen to, is it not by their own agency that they're not part of this bigger dialogue?
I think that's not they're not interested in history necessarily, but actually when you do find them, as I have with many people, they do want to tell their story, but they're just not often contactable in the conventional way, and you have to use your underground network contacts to find them. But when you do find them, I think that their stories are the most interesting.
Okay. Mikey, and then I'll love to hear from some people who haven't heard much.
There's a friend of mine that's starting this project called the Museum of Lives, and it's all about people that have lived really interesting, inspirational lives, but are not famous and not historical in the sense of being part of this mainstream historical narrative. But there's so many people like that in the world that have done really amazing things, and it doesn't get really recognized. So this initiative is basically a way just to celebrate these people that have not sought fame but have done really remarkable things. And then there's millions of them out there, I'm sure, but we just don't know who they are and what they've done.
That sounds amazing. In what physical manifestation is this taking form?
Well, it's just like a conventional museum, but it's just like, it's all about finding really interesting people and then celebrating that person.
Who has some interesting people that they'd add to this kind of museum? We've had a couple of these. I'm kind of curious, this might be a good question to pose to people who haven't sort of brought up much yet. Come and join in, Lady in Red, and we'll. Who would you add to the museum? Sorry, what was it called? Museum of
Lives.
Museum of Lives. Like an inspiring, interesting, different, curious character. No one.
Maybe we could add Mikey to the Museum of Life.
I'll come around. Hang on. What's
Oh, I don't know. Hoppy Hopkins. Although he's dead now, isn't he? Yeah.
Apparently, that's somebody. Who is this?
Oh, he was. Oh God, he started up IT, or one of the people that started up IT, ran Fantasy Factory for a while, which was a kind of alternative video resource place.
Okay.
What else did he do? Ran the London Filmmakers Co-op.
Was the first psychedelic club in London. Pink Floyd was its resident group. But Hoppy was also involved with CND before that. He was a physicist who became he became famous. He was the first guy to be bussed for joints in London. He became a hippie legend, Hoppy. And then with his club UFO, you could go there, you drop acid, and it's very. Hoppy died. Actually, there's a big promotion trying to raise money for him, and his. Another more contemporary is it's actually two guys, Martin and Mark Scooby. They were very responsible for the club Megatropolis. They wrote flyers. We had an indoor eco market. These guys are unsung, and they should be sung about, really. They changed the rave scene just so much. It was beautiful.
Come back to these guys. And who would you add to this Museum of Life? Museum of Lives?
Gosh, you might have to come back to me on that one. I don't think anyone's...
All right, just put your hand up if you think of somebody.
A gentleman called Giambattista Della Porta. So personal to me, I work building kind of holographic displays, and obviously everyone knows it as kind of Pepper's Ghost. but originally it was created in the 16th century by a scientist, but again, what you were saying before, commercialized and taken into kind of a wider, commercialized by John Henry Pepper and taken forward to that. So it'd be nice to kind of recognize someone like that, which has now been brought forward into modern culture today.
So some underdogs as well as sort of unsung heroes, but people who actually got usurped.
A little bit different angle.
So Tesla as opposed to Edison, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who would I? Oh, I suppose in fashion, because that's my background. I would say there was a lot of people from Kensington Market in the 70s and 80s who still haven't told their story, and fashion was very, conservative generally in those times in the mainstream shops, and a lot of the ideas that then got taken up by the bigger designers actually came from places like Kensington Market, Camden Market, and all of those places. And the two people I would nominate are the people who started Big Jesus Trash Can, which was a label that was all about Masonic and religious identity, and they were incredibly influential, both of whom have gone completely to ground. I can't find them at all, but again, incredibly influential.
Fascinating. Had a bit from you. I'll come back though because this sounded interesting.
I would say Copernicus.
You'd say
Copernicus.
Copernicus. Do we not know a lot about Copernicus?
Well, he changed the idea that the world doesn't rotate around the Earth.
But he's quite famous.
He's important. I don't think people give him enough credit.
Okay.
I would say there's probably a modern day Copernicus, maybe not in the field of astrophysics, but in some field that is kind of like saying something that no one wants to hear. And they're out there somewhere saying this thing that is an essential truth, but no one wants to hear it. But we just don't. Maybe they're here in this room. I don't know.
There's a lot of things there's a lot of things here that are sort of quite on the fringes of science that might be those kind of figures. Who knows?
I think that's a very good point.
Yeah. But why is it that there are these people who need more spoken about them that don't seem to get their recognition? Why does that actually happen to begin with?
I've seen it in the last year. Agents. People have good agents, and if you don't have a good agent, you don't get heard.
So it's sort of like, sort of what we're touching on. It's largely down to the big guys squashing the little guys.
Well, not necessarily big guys squashing the little guys. The thing is that in order to get heard these days, and it wasn't like this, by the way, in the 90s, I have to state that. Okay. I've just done a book on the 90s, and I was very struck by the differences of the 90s to now. And what I found now is that a lot of the talking heads you find in the ICA and the big museums often have good agents, and it's all about being an agent, being seen, being a talking head. And these people are credible people, that's fantastic. But the people who maybe know as much but don't have agents, they don't get picked up. And that's what it's about. Whereas in the 90s, I think there was much more effort made to find different countercultural people. I mean, for instance, a very good example of that is The Face magazine. My friend Cheryl Garrett was editor of The Face. She took massive risks with that magazine that was incredibly influential and stuck totally unknown bands and unknown people on the front of that magazine. It's very rare now to have big style and fashion magazines with unknown people on the front. It's all people who've already proved themselves, and I think that element of risk has sort of gone in the mainstream media. On the other hand, with the internet, what's so great about the internet, it gives everybody a voice. So, that means that someone like James can start his own blog, who may not be picked up by the wider media. So I think there's both going on, but I notice certainly in the mainstream institutions, they just tend to pick the same talking heads from the same agents.
And this is kind of related to something that, this is Carol. So we were saying earlier about how social media sort of blindsides people a bit, and it makes it easy to find certain people who are very prominent, but harder to find those who aren't. But then if everyone has a voice, that sounds like a bit of a paradox.
I think so. For me, I love social media, and social media has actually changed my life. And I could categorically say that at later stages in life, I've found so many people that I knew from the past. I think it depends how you use it. I think if you use it in a very sort of, straightforward way, it does that. But if you're creative with social media, it's amazing what you can find.
Just for the benefit of those who have just joined us, this is Talkaoke, a talk show where we can talk about anything. We've got a couple of sort of guest panelists and we're talking about a few different ideas. I'm just going to go around and get a list of names.
Just to continue being devil's advocate, I'll still stick with social media having a downside, and it's the only way you can explain the rise of people like Donald Trump, that basically any idiot can, sitting at their computer could just have their say, and they have an equal level of authority, and if they're prepared to just sit there and continue doing it, they just shout the loudest, and the reasonable voices get drowned out. And that's the only way of explaining his rise, and it's a bit worrying for politics in the future.
Armchair activism.
The idiocracy.
That's something that came up in conversation yesterday, the idea that, the loudest voices aren't necessarily the most positive.
I've seen that happen in the jury room, it's scary.
And any thoughts on this kind of idea, like why certain voices are elevated beyond others? Yeah, come a bit closer as well, it's going to be a bit tricky to hear you.
I think that anxiety is a big issue today, and I think that it's a very current disease, and a lot of people probably don't get their voices heard because they're anxious. And in America especially, like going what you said about Donald Trump, is that he's loud but there's no content there. His context is that he works very well speaking to crowds and gathering fans, but there's no substance, there's no like sustainable substance to him. Whereas there are probably a lot of other people who do have a lot of good content, but their context is not in front of crowds, it's probably in their bedroom or something, which is why I think social media is so powerful, because these people do have access to a platform where they can reach a lot of people.
Okay, that's an interesting one. And again, it's more food for thought on this idea. There seems to be sort of two, not opposite, but sort of ideas that overlap a bit about how social media can be detrimental, but say that there's quite a lot of positives coming about.
I mean, the thing that Donald Trump has got a lot of traction through social media, and it's not just his supporters, it's also his detractors, like people sending around a lot of videos kind of parodying him because he's such an unbelievable, insane figure. It's easy to parody, and we pick up on that, but that means somehow it's distorted and actually given more profile by even those who don't like him. I mean, I'm sure the mainstream media are concerned about his voice, but they can't resist reporting some of the things that he says.
Quick comment there, but then let's find some opinions from people.
Yeah, David Byrne had something interesting to say about that in an article called the Echo Chamber, which I think may have been used before. Yeah, the side. I mean, what's happening with things like Facebook is you like those videos that lampoon Trump, yeah? So you click like, so they know that you're going to keep watching those things, and you'll end up watching the same things that the other people who like the people who happen to like Trump will never see them. Because they don't turn up on their Facebook page. So the lampooning only is seen by, you only see what you want to see. And then that's one of the dangers of social media. They're channeling, I mean, the drive behind it is marketing, but also it ends up with this very narrow view of the world. You end up being convinced that your point of view is correct because you see nothing else, because that's what it's giving you. And I think that's really dangerous.
So what opinions from this side of the table? Do you feel like sort of social media, especially social media, is making people a bit myopic and they're sort of living in their own little echo chambers, and that's why certain figures become more prominent than others? Or any opinion? Any opinions on those kind of issues or around?
Social media.
Well, not necessarily social media, but that seems to be. Yeah, sure.
Like, for example, if you were to just poll people in this room, you would think that the idea of Britain leaving the EU was a ridiculous kind of nonsense, because I bet there's not a single person in this room that's in favour of Britain leaving the EU, and that's how I've lived my life for the last 20 years. Well, maybe one or two. But because that is effectively my world, is this kind of echo chamber that doesn't actually reflect the wider Britain whatsoever. And I think it's the same with, with Trump or whatever. We just get the ideas come back to us, do you know what I mean? That we want to hear. We don't necessarily hear like this man over here who's against the EU. Probably won't listen to what he says.
Was he just prodding for the sake of it? I don't know. It's hard to tell with him. You had your hand up.
I was going to continue with these ideas that get prominence in the media. Yeah. I'm just thinking about Israel's portrayal of kind of Israel's portrayal of being a kind of a dominant kind of the way it treats Palestine essentially, and whether there's a lot of, if it's a true a representation of what's really happening in the Middle East, or there's a intention behind British politics. There's a kind of quote of anti-Semitism. Ken Livingstone's been accused of being an anti-Semitic, and I'm just curious to know what people think about that.
Well, should we get some final thoughts from these guys?
Yeah, that's a bad one.
Got any final thoughts on stuff?
Maybe that's a naughty subject to
You'll come back.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, I like that. Yeah, back to Fiona.
I can't comment on your comment, but from the social media point of view, I work a lot with young people, and what I'm seeing a lot now, because times are so tough for them in London, and especially in music and fashion, which is my background, a lot of platforms are starting up now, which are promoting people for free, and they're basically like setting up on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, on all of these things. SBTV by Jamal Edwards was an early version of this, but I'm seeing lots of newer versions coming up. And I think that in that way, social media is an absolute force for good, because people who would not maybe have a voice and would not be seen by the record companies, by the fashion industry, are having an almost equal platform with people who are a lot bigger than them. And I actually, on my Instagram, I promote young people, and a lot of the people I promoted, one star who just started very recently, performed at one of my parties, is now on Radio 1 Extra. And that's because I have a lot of people following me, and when I put things on my Instagram, they pick them up and they use them. So I think, it really depends. It's like everything. You can use everything for good, it's yin and yang, everything for bad. And I think it's how you use it. That's my personal opinion.
Okay, interesting idea. These services, they're not charging, but they're helping advertise people. And could these people do it without these platforms? Because you mentioned Instagram and YouTube. You don't pay to use these initially, so why a middleman in there?
Well, basically, any kid can load up their music video to YouTube, but basically it's harder to find. So if you have a platform, there's a platform that's just started, a really interesting young music platform called I Am Next, and it started off by a really young guy, and he's literally called it a platform called I Am Next, and he's inviting anyone, any young person who has a good music video, to put their music video on his platform, because he's got a reputation of finding new talent. People are looking at him, and then therefore someone's video that maybe be lost on YouTube is now noticed on I Am Next. I mean, SBDV was the first person to do this, Jamal Edwards, but I think now there's more and more other people starting, because even he can't cope with the amount of talent out there. And I think it's great, it's working. I Am Next is now doing events around London, and Stormzy, who's now huge, he got something like 500,000 YouTube views in 3 days. He was at the bottom of the bill on, I think it was I Am Next or one of those platforms anyway, just a year ago, and now he's absolutely massive. He's second to Skepta. So, I think, for too long, the record industry, the fashion industry controlled who was going to be next. And these
so this
platforms,
is a way of sort of demarcating,
they're almost like democratic, because the
it, yeah.
public is choosing who is next. And I think that's amazing.
What are people's thoughts on this? Mikey, I thought you might have an opinion, being an artist.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, I think one of the things is, talking about being big and being massive and 500,000 YouTube hits. I'm not against that, but my concern is like artistic progression, actually developing artistically, and do these platforms actually allow young creators to develop artistically? Are people actually looking at performers from other genres? Is there that exchange, or are they just sort of purely kind of career driven and focused on being next?
That's a fair point. So are people just chasing the numbers and using these platforms to accelerate a career rather than use it to develop their artistic sensibilities?
Well, obviously, most of the talent on these platforms is young. I mean, it doesn't have to be young. It could be any age, for the platforms. But what it's doing, it's giving them exposure, and that's what they're finding hard in an increasingly, crowded market. And it's also giving them, they're doing events, so they, giving them exposure through the events. I mean, in the old days, the only way you got known is when a record company picked up on you, and it was very much down to the choice of the A&R man who got famous. Now, with these platforms, it's down to the public. They decide who's going to be famous without, the Simon Cowells or the record company people deciding. And I find it extremely exciting, and these acts are developing. Like, there's a few young acts that I've been working with lately, and, they've gone from just one or two songs to having a whole repertoire, and then when they get to a certain size, they are picked up by the record company. But what I found out in the music industry is no one wants to invest in young talent anymore. They want people to be ready to be signed. So how do you get them ready. The way you get them ready is being on a platform, getting the exposure, getting the hits, and then when you are developed, you're picked up. Because unfortunately, no one wants to spend the money to develop raw talent anymore.
But so then it sounds like these platforms sort of serving the record industry in a way. Is that hang on, a nod over here? Is that something you agree with, or?
No, I do agree with what you're saying, because I think essentially it becomes a place where to an extent that the record industry, they pick up the people with the most hits, and I suppose again it comes down to it's very democratic, because if the people believe that that's the best person, then it makes it easier for the record industry to then go, oh, obviously they're really popular, we take them on, they're going to sell. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it makes the lives of the record industry like a lot easier, but it also allows kind of young artists to have the opportunity to grow and to get themselves out there with like little to no money. They don't have to spend a lot of money, they can make their own videos, and it opens up to everyone to have the opportunity to make something of themselves.
Okay.
I find it also incredibly creative. I mean, some of the young acts I've seen have done homemade videos, and then they've actually gone on to be a bit bigger. And when they've got a big director in, I've often found the videos quite dull. I found more creativity when they were actually doing it themselves. So I think it gives a free rein to creativity, whereas before the record companies say, no, we want the video like this, we want this director, we want it to look like this. But when they're doing it themselves, the ideas that some of these young people come up with are fantastically creative. I worked with Skepta last year on a party in 2 years ago last November, and I found it absolutely fascinating the way that the grime scene has developed, and the way that they developed their own personas and their own followings on social media to a huge extent. I think Skepta had something like 500,000 followers before he got signed up, so they had a lot of control over their careers.
Okay. Final thoughts on the issues we've been talking about.
Talking about music quite a lot, and I think I can foresee something changing within the music industry as a result of. I'm focusing on VR and augmented reality again, but a lot of the stuff that I've been experimenting with is positional audio within a space, which is obviously very different to traditional music production where you're mixing for 2 speakers or whatever. And I think that there's an opportunity for that distribution sort of channel to not. I don't know. Maybe it will just get owned by the music industry anyway. But I think it'd be interesting to see whether that sort of different format, which I think will probably develop over the next 5 or 10 years. So we're talking about virtual, sort of music, like the resurrection of the music album. The sort of, instead of a single where you get like an experience where you go through a full sort of full album rather than sort of single hits, which seems to be more. Where music has gone in recent years could be quite interesting. So yeah.
So a different way of experiencing music as a way of so experimenters will be rewarded because of this new format, and it might be a way of exposing new talent.
I guess whether someone else wrestles away the power from the people who've got that. So it's a different channel that owns that.
Thank you. Do you want to give us a final
parting word and another negative one, which is I think the music industry is totally fucked, because I think in the future people are not expected to pay for anything, and.
But do you think
where's the revenue going to come from? And the same problem with VR. I mean, I'm finding it. I can see perhaps various companies who could kind of get into doing corporate stuff, but how on earth are we going to make any money? Nobody expects to pay for this.
Anyway, but can I just one tiny thing? So you said the music industry is fucked, but do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing?
I think the way the industry was, when I started seeing it happening, I just thought, well, good riddance, But the way it's going, it's very difficult for musicians to actually have a long-term career where they can actually make some money. Yeah, they can get a few hits, be a big name for a couple of years, and then they're gone. What kind of, that's not a career. We need something more sustainable.
Okay.
I don't see where it's coming from, other than live gigging all the time. He wants to talk.
Cool. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Raises some questions. Let's see if
it's a buggy whip industry. It's a buggy whip industry. That means basically industry that's fucked because the technology just isn't useful anymore. You can't hold on to recordings and make them artificially scarce anymore. So it's basically a fucked industry. It needs to completely reinvent itself. The music industry, I will say as well, is not the same thing as the culture of music. You could like take the medium of money away, people would still make music. And in societies where there's no money, there's no commerce, there's no industry, we still have music.
Like in the old days, maybe we're going back to a culture like we had in the old days when everybody had a piano, and you know, unfortunately they'll all be wearing their VR headsets in their bedrooms, so there'll be that difference.
But should we embrace that though? This idea of demonetizing the music industry.
I personally think it's no bad thing that the music industry's fucked. Because I think what it's done. No, I think what it's done is gone back to music. The people who are making music are making it because they want to, and that's and because not because they're being paid. It's got rid of all the expense accounts and all the managers, and that's no bad thing because there was too much control going on. Look at Prince. Look what happened to Prince. He got so fed up with the music industry that he took everything back himself. The music industry is not necessarily a good thing, and I think that what's happening now. Look at Skepta. Skepta started from absolutely nothing. Tottenham Council estate, built his own following on social media. Now he's got so big, he's selling out every single thing he does, and he's tying up with brands. He's just tied up with Uniqlo. He tied up with Supreme. That's how he's earning his money, from that and from the events. The fact that people are downloading his music for free doesn't matter at all. He's earning his money through other ways, and that's what's happened. The whole model of music industry has changed, and what I think is really healthy about the music industry is suddenly all entrants can come in. I think it's great. It's like punk, was back in the day, that anyone with a guitar has the potential to be in a band, and that's what it should be about. I think there was too much control before, too many of the taste makers deciding what people wanted. I have a friend who was working with Skepta absolutely years ago, 5 years ago. He went to the record companies and told them about Skepta. They did not want to know. Skepta had to build his own audience because it was the only way he'd get heard, and look what's happened. He's massive.
And so the music industry has been punked. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is like, it's not just for musicians, because I'm not a musician and I've got no musical talent whatsoever. But I think any kind of creative producer, for some reason, I think there's been a lack of creativity in how you actually turn that into a living, into a money-making venture. And I think we really actually need to focus on that to actually increase our creativity in our culture, is work out different and new ways to make money from being creative. Instead of just like, when I went to art school, it was all about how to get your work into a gallery, how to have a curator, and it's just so sad and narrow to try and force all these like art students down this same road when they're such creative people.
I have quite a few friends who are big street artists. I won't say their names, but they are pretty big. And a lot of them won't use galleries because galleries take so much money. They take at least 50% of your work, and some of the galleries don't pay. A lot of them are doing street art, and just basically charging commissions off the building owners or off brands. And there's a lot of different ways that you can earn money if you're creative. I think that it's no bad thing that the old models are collapsing. I think, there were, like I say, a narrow bunch of people who were deciding what taste was, and now it's the public deciding, because when it's on social media and it's on the internet, it literally is, if you get a lot of likes, you're not getting those likes for no reason, you're getting them because people like you. And if that empowers you to go and then earn money through other ways, there's tons of different ways you can monetize yourself. And also, I think the really great thing is that a lot of these young people are doing it because they love it. It's gone back to the passion again, and it should be about that, because it's just about the money, it's very boring.
Well, let's find out from our new faces around the table. So we're sort of discussing many things, but loosely the death of the music industry and the way that art and culture is transforming to almost be demonetized has come up a couple of times. I wonder what your thoughts on this may be. Anyone want to chime in on this?
Well, this is something that's quite dear to me personally, and I think that it's not really the death of the music industry. I see it more as the liberation of content.
Okay.
Now, one thing is that as the artist, there's two ways of thinking about it. There's two schools of thinking. One school of thinking is that the artist is someone that creates the content, and the industry is how the artist gets his content out there, which is quite simple. It's quite straightforward. Whereas if you actually look at music and art as an idea and as a concept itself, the artist isn't really the creator of the concept. The artist isn't the creator at all. In fact, all the artist is a conduit to let the people know exactly how the people feel about the specific subject. And this is something that if you look back at history, you look at guys like during the Renaissance, also the French Revolution, and you look at even guys like Wagner, they always believed that the artist was actually more important than the scientist, for example, or the academic. Because what the artist gets to do is to speak on the subject to a point and not actually be hindered by class, systems, or anything like that. So in reality, I feel that what we're doing and what technology has allowed us to do now is to actually catch up to that in a way, shape, size, or form.
Sort of a digital renaissance. Intrigued by this. Right, yep. And Jazz?
I think that there's a distinction that needs to be made between music industry and music technology. It's the technology in the past that enabled for an industry to exist. Now, when modern times we have people who are musicians and artists who can have access to the technology directly without having to go through an industry, it means they get to produce their own music in the way that they want it and reach people through MP3 or online platforms or whatever. And the industry isn't needed anymore. What's needed is for musicians to continue to be industrious but utilize modern technology to deliver their message out to people. So I'm not afraid of the music industry dying, because the fact is the industry will continue courtesy of musicians and upcoming and existing technologies.
So even without the money, the art will survive.
I just want to pick on a point that you made, and it's specific. It's it's this thing about where does actually the music exist or the art exist. It's actually not at the point, this kind of idea of the creative genius, like it comes out onto the canvas or onto the musical score, but it's actually at the point of the ear or the eye, or in fact the brain of the person that's participating or absorbing the music. So they are being just as creative as the artist. And I think to look at, and we could look at all of this technology here. Who's making the technology? On the one hand, you've got companies making the devices and whatever, and people theorizing all weekend about how it works, but actually where the magic is happening is in all of our brains.
Okay, and we had a point about...
Yeah, but just to come back to the industry, I mean, realistically, industry as a concept only exists because of the failure of technology from day one. If you look at things like copyright, the only reason that artists can charge for a representation of their art in the first place is because the actual people that consumed the stuff in the first place couldn't copy it. So from day one, if you wanted to copy a book, you had to have your own printing press. So because you couldn't copy it, there was you wouldn't even think to yourself that, oh, actually I can replicate this, and therefore you'd buy it. Now, as technology has got to a point where we can copy, obviously with a photocopy and so on and so forth, we can copy that. In terms of MP3s, we can download music and so on and so forth. We're actually at a point where art can exist truly in a point where it's not bound by any of the rigmaroles of industry. And all the industries that have been created around art are only there because people have found a way to actually monetize and make money off those creating the art in the first place. So once again, it's also a liberation of the art itself from the clutches of the industry.
So there's several kinds of liberation going on here. There's liberation from the kind of monetized form, but because of the amount of art, I was getting back to something sort of Mikey said, because I wasn't quite clear on the receiver has as much responsibility for creating the art.
You're completing the artwork in a way. You know, it's like, just if I went out there and started just talking about this on the street and no one's actually listening, then it's just like noise, isn't it? But because at least 7 people are actually listening to what I'm saying, that's completing that thought in a way, or completing the proposition that I'm making. And it's the same with any artwork. And they've got just as important a role. That's all I'm saying. And the site maybe of that happening is not necessarily where it emanates from, but maybe where it hits another brain.
And do you feel this is part of the reason that people don't want to pay for things? Because this idea is kind of in I'll come back to that. Hang on.
Well, let's look at what happened with Prince. You know, he had this little deal, and the people who he was working for didn't let him have the freedom to express himself the way he wanted and produce music as often as he wanted. And what did he do? He'd rather dissolve his identity altogether than put up with that kind of crap, and which is what he did. But it allowed him to continue to at least be something that they couldn't control. And I think that's really important when it comes to music. You need to have freedom to express and not have your creativity, you know, confined just because it serves some business interest. When that happens, the creativity gets corrupted, and it means that executives make money while the artists are not being allowed to be as creative in an authentic way as they could be. So as soon as he broke out of that contract and he was able to go back to making music the way he wanted, as frequently as he wanted to, then that's when you see his genius return, and he's not answerable and accountable to a bunch of executives and money, but actually something more meaningful.
So we need more pioneers like them, and I think Radiohead and Nine Inch Nails did something. So we're getting back to, you'll tell us. Okay. So it's about the receiver doesn't want to pay for things anymore, and I'm kind of curious about reasons for that.
I completely disagree with that, completely. Actually, you'll find that, hold on, there's a tech. Okay. You'll find that when something is of great quality, people have no problem paying for it. And that's always been the case from prehistory till now. Okay. And you find that also with artists, the reason that the artist/industry model has been created is because we've had I suppose, media and industry that has perpetuated that image. They've said to us that the only way as an artist you can do this is through us. You need us. Whereas if you go back to the historical model, the artist had a patron. And what the patron would do is the patron would allow the artist to have their own freedom because the patron believed in the artist and his true form. And the patron would be like, I'll fund whatever you're doing, you just have to make something. And the artist would go off into his own little hut, do whatever he was doing, and then come up with this thing. I don't know, it might be the Sistine Chapel or, you know, the Mona Lisa, and then everyone goes, way, you know, artists moving forward. But then that was because the patron wasn't trying to make money from the art. Whereas they already had money. Yeah. Whereas now, the industry has become the patron, but the industry also has a monetary aspect. It's fiscal. Fundamentally, it has to pay for itself. You have to pay for your board members. You have to pay for your office. So they're also hindered. They can't leave the artist to be completely free because they're worried about the bank balance.
Okay. Now I think we've got a few minutes left. So should we start getting final thoughts and that kind of thing? Les, you had your hand up. So
I just think that's a very rosy sort of understanding of the patronage system.
Final thought?
And like mostly it was the church or aristocrats who wanted to show the glory of God and the divine right of kings to rule, and you know, if artworks challenged that, then probably the artist would be more than dismissed. That, you know, there would be no more. So you know, I think we're actually progressing, and I think the industry idea is a stepping stone to something which is more creative and more expressive and got more potential. But it's obviously clearly dead, and it needs to move on. But that's exciting and interesting, but not necessarily outside of an economy, because our economy is growing more and more, and money has become more and more important. So I don't see why music can't re-engage with that in a different way.
Okay. So thank you for that. And final thoughts. We'll do final thoughts and we'll go around.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what I find exciting at the moment is the fact that regardless of whatever rules or regulations or legal mumbo jumbo that we create to try and harness all this stuff, there will always be someone that will find a way around it. A. B. There will always be someone that will find an artistic way to inhabit a space that hasn't been inhabited before, and that will always prevail, because realistically the undercurrent of the actual general populace of humanity will always follow whatever it finds interesting, regardless of what you tell it to do.
Thank you.
I think it's a really exciting time at the moment in all of the creative industries. So I just think it's letting a lot of people in who were shut out. And I think digital media generally, all of the platforms that are going on at the moment, you know, whether it's Snapchat, Instagram, Periscope, Facebook, everything is giving loads and loads of people a voice. And if you find creative ways to harness that, then you can monetize it as well. And I think, look at the street artists. That's a really good example of what's happening in art, where people are literally just painting the sides of buildings if they can't find a gallery. They don't need a gallery anymore. That galleries have a role, and certainly in the conventional art world, but there's so many different ways of getting your art out there. Same with music. They're tying up with brands now. You get a certain following on social media platforms. Brands want to work with you, and they pay you. Look at the whole YouTube phenomenon. All the YouTubers earning money, from their bedroom. I think this is really exciting because loads and loads of voices that were never heard and would have never been heard can now be heard, and that for me is exciting.
It's the democratization. What about you guys over here? Have you got some final thoughts, conclusory remarks?
I actually really agree with.
Yeah.
I don't know what your name is, but what you
Fiona.
said about
Yeah.
No, I think it's like a double thing because there's a voice for everyone, but maybe because there's so much of it, it's also much harder to filter out what's important and what's because it's that whole thing of since that people have iPhones with a camera, everyone's a photographer all of a sudden, and everyone can post their art. So I guess we have to be more critical, but we also just have to be open to everything that's there. So I just think it's finding a balance of what you like and what you don't. And that's it.
Okay. Any other conclusion, closing remarks, final thoughts? One more, but then let's.
I think there's someone that talks specifically about this, and that's Dr. Roth. He's got a very, very, what I think is the most ironclad view in terms of what we're talking about. And the democratization of art or tech really is where we're moving towards, and I think that's the best way forward anyway.
Cool, thank you very much. Well, so this has been Talkaoke. My name is Rowan, I've been your host for this afternoon session. Give yourselves a round of applause for having a chat with me. Now, what are we about to see or hear, or both? James, what's happening now?
So we've got Jazz, he's going to explain what's going on in the room.
Yeah, if anybody wants to learn Jedi skills, they're welcome to come to next door and start feeling the Force between their hands and sharing it with one another, and see what amazing consequences there are for being a Jedi for half an hour. So if anybody wants to learn some Jedi techniques, then come next door. We're doing that now for the next half hour or so. Thank you.
Cool.
And then here we've got Simon Boswell, who's just setting up, and together we collaborated on Hack the Planet, Hackers. So we're going to be showing a game and a soundtrack that he did called Burn Cycle, also hardware, and yeah, just kind of some music to kind of get us into the Hack the Planet, Hackstock vibe. So that's going to kick in now.